Michael, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Shasta. How are you doing?
Good, good. There's some exciting things going on in aviation this week.
Yeah, aviation and aerospace, and I think it really follows up what we talked about last week in terms of policy and how policy could drive innovation. So, what is in the news, Shasta?
So, exciting news for SpaceX. SpaceX is cleared by the FAA to launch its first orbital Starship flight, which will happen today, and that is really exciting. To give you a summary, the Federal Aviation Administration issued a Starship launch license to SpaceX, and this is a crucial final regulatory step that clears the company to attempt an orbital launch of its own towering rocket for the first time. SpaceX, with the FAA license now in hand, aims to launch Starship as soon as this morning from its private facility in Texas, which is along the Gulf Coast. The Starship is scheduled to take off to launch at 7 a.m. Central Time. So in February, SpaceX completed a test firing of the Super Heavy booster, which has 33 Raptor engines at its base, in one of the final technical steps towards the launch.
So, this is a very big deal for SpaceX and almost like a culmination or another step in what has been really like a 20+ year journey. SpaceX was officially started, I believe, founded in 2002, almost like 21 years later. Elon had this idea that we needed to become a spacefaring species, and beyond just going back to the moon and so forth, what came out of SpaceX were just other benefits, such as this thing Starlink that we're now seeing the benefits of. So they're putting up satellites in space to boost connectivity around the world, and this is one thing that the aviation industry specifically is looking to benefit from. So what I love about innovation in these spaces is that there are these downstream effects that we get to realize later on.
To kind of learn more about SpaceX history, we both listened to a podcast. Amazing. It's called Business Wars, SpaceX versus Blue Origin. And this podcast does such an incredible job of just taking you back briefly to the start of both of these companies, the founders, their interests in aviation. They also talk about Virgin Galactic as well. But the biggest thing is it just talks about SpaceX's origins and how they were so frustrated with the high cost and just not being able to access certain materials and equipment to launch their space program. And, at one point, Elon Musk goes to Russia to negotiate rockets with the Russians because they were better priced. And then he left the meeting and said, we have to figure out a way to do all of this internally. And it's quite amazing to see all of the progress that SpaceX has made throughout the years. I feel like they've, once they got their first rocket launch, things moved relatively quickly. And it also talks about their SpaceX's relationship with the FAA and NASA, and how it started off on a very rocky start. And, once they started proving their concept, they eventually came on board, NASA as a partner. So great podcast to tune into just to learn a little bit about SpaceX's start and their developments throughout the year.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is if you're trying to, sometimes bring something to the world that might be disruptive, not that you're intended to be disruptive, but in building it, it might cause some pushback from the status quo. You sometimes just, if you believe enough in your vision, you have to do what you have to do to make it work. And you can see, that's sort of minus some of the idiosyncrasies of Elon Musk aside, like that, I would say is one of his superpowers, is that when he understands something in his core and he's committed to it, he will do what it takes to get it to work. And then even though the status quo might not be on his side initially, eventually they tend to come around. So we've seen that with SpaceX and we've seen that with Tesla. and I'm sure there are other things. But I think that there's like a strong takeaway there for young people to, you want to become really smart at things, you want to become experts, but you also want to question things deeply and say, could we do this better?
As we say that, because I agree with you wholeheartedly, but it's really hard to get up in front of people who don't really necessarily believe in your vision and try to explain it, because the pushback could just be really discouraging. And I kind of felt a little bit of it when I announced the flight around the world. You know, people were like, well, why does this have to be a solo flight? You know, why are you doing this and that? And it took just several years of standing behind this idea of reaching young children around the world through this global flight. It took, you know, a lot of years to finally get people to see the vision and then eventually support it. And I feel like we might be running into that a little bit with our next chapter and this digital hub, because our solution is not necessarily one event or one dimensional. It really serves the entire aviation industry, and it could be a lot for people to consume and understand. And then sometimes I feel like I think everyone wants a long-term solution, but just putting in the time and the effort could be, you know, discouraging for them to follow through with a long-term vision. What are your thoughts?
I just keep going back to the founding days of SpaceX. So SpaceX was founded in March 2022, so March 14, 2022. And then on February 1st, 2023, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated as it was re-entering the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So if you think about even that timing where the preeminent space agency was having its most difficult period, it took boldness on Elon Musk's side to say, well, I'm going to get us back to Mars without being laughed out of a room, because if NASA couldn't do it properly, who are you to think that you could get it done? And so I just really admire that tenacity and the willingness on their part to do the work to make it happen. It wasn't easy as what we're seeing, because now it's like 20 plus years after. Obviously, there has been other benefits or milestones where they've created the reusable rockets. They've landed them on these bases out in the ocean, and now here we are with this launch. So,
and to your point too, it's not like Elon Musk, you know, first try he was successful. You know, even though so much was happening, it took him a couple tries to successfully launch a rocket. There were several disappointments and you know, things not going well, and I think that just added to society or the public's idea that he's not really fit for this and he's just throwing his money away. But he pressed on, and it took a couple tries, but you know, they finally were successful. And when you look into the future, when you look into now, this is really exciting to launch the Starship rocket.